Fake news, the latest buzz term, added to the vernacular of those too ignorant to synthesize informed arguments or engage in meaningful debate. Racist, sexist, Islamophobe, homophobe, fascist, Hitler, and now, of course, fake news. All terms you can use to avoid having to defend your opinions. All terms you can now use to avoid having to reconcile facts and evidence contradictory to your viewpoint. But what exactly is meant by fake news? I tend to view the topic in a broader sense, that is to say, the term fake news to me means that people are conceiving the notion that journalism, especially during the last century, is far from objective and is in no way a philanthropic venture. People, in now significant numbers, are beginning to realize that the mainstream corporate media exists to drive profits and push a political agenda. Journalism, in the traditional sense of the word, is dead. It has been dead. And there are two main catalysts responsible for people finally beginning to show up for the funeral: the internet and Donald Trump, or more broadly, access to information and a reason to ask questions. These are the same catalysts that ushered in the Age of Enlightenment during the 18th century. It used to be that as an illiterate commoner, your questions of science, of spirituality, or politics had to be deferred to the very few in society who had access to information. Those few men, by no coincidence, were all part of a ruling elite comprising of the clergy, the nobility, and governors. Do you think then that kings and noblemen and clergymen may have had an interest in controlling the perceived reality through their strict control of information transfer? Do you think that the elite may have used fake news to exploit the ordinary man and woman and maintain power? Listen here, you worthless peasants. The barbarians are coming to kill us all, so you need to toil in the fields and mines from sunup to sundown and relinquish everything you produce to the crown. Keep your head low and do everything I say, or you'll burn for all eternity in the smoldering sulfur pits of hell because the Bible says so. Of course, you'll just have to trust me on that one because you don't know how to read. And even if you did, you would never be able to afford a book. With the invention of the printing press in 1439, however, information began to spread like wildfire, such that the 16th century was marked by increasingly impactful struggles between the ruling elite and the common people. Most notable may be the Protestant Reformation, in which Martin Luther encouraged people to arm themselves by reading the Bible and telling the Catholic Church, which had oppressed them for centuries, to fuck off. As the literacy rate across Europe continued to rise and millions of books entered the circulation, it wasn't long until major power shifts ensued. During the Age of Enlightenment, which in my opinion started with the development of the scientific method and the general concept of reductionism, you saw something truly remarkable begin to happen. Not only was information becoming widely available, but people were actively engaging in discourse and exchanging ideas. This is when coffee houses and debate societies and Masonic lodges and salons began to emerge across the West. And no, I don't mean a salon as a place where these fine gentlemen went to get their wigs brushed and powdered. These were all places where people went to debate and strengthen theories of science, of philosophy, politics, and every other topic imaginable. Again, access to information and a daring to know led to a global enlightenment that climaxed with the American and French revolutions, ousting oppressive monarchies and ushering in representative governments. I firmly believe that right now, we are in the middle of a second age of enlightenment. No longer do the ruling elite control the flow of information through their propaganda arm, the media. The internet allows us little peasants to circumvent their political agenda. How fucking insane is it that the entirety of human knowledge, past, present, future, is in the air? It's all around us, and we can access it with a smartphone, with a computer. We take this for granted, but I can't help but be in awe when I stop to really think about it for a moment. The corporate media's reporting of Donald Trump emboldens us to question the reality of what is happening, and the internet arms us with the knowledge and truth to formulate our own opinions and conclusions. No longer do serfs need the vile and opportunistic ruling elite to formulate those opinions for them. Now, before anybody throws words in my mouth, let me clarify. In no way am I suggesting that Donald Trump is responsible for enlightening people. I am merely pointing out the fact that the incessant negative media coverage that he has received has encouraged millions of people to question the validity of that reporting, and in questioning that established power structure, they have gained some degree of enlightenment. Now, the most beautiful thing about enlightenment is that it functions not only in a prospective manner, but also in a retrospective manner. Once you realize that you are being lied to, you also realize that the lies do not start today. You can go back and analyze the propaganda surrounding the Iraq War, the the Vietnam War, and virtually every other significant political event dating back to the dawn of time. As an aside here, I will caution the corporate media and those with establishment interests to tread very carefully as you continue to incessantly promote negative coverage, gross over-sensationalism, and outright lies about Donald Trump and other nationalistic movements sweeping across Europe. You will only drive more people to enlightenment. I've spoken to this before. What happens then when Donald Trump is involved in a real scandal? No one will believe them. Every time I hear something about the president on mainstream news, I automatically assume that it is either false or taken wildly out of context. They will not heed this warning though. I predict instead that those in power and those seeking to subjugate the general populace will target the internet very aggressively in the upcoming years. They have realized that the free flow of information is what has led to their defeat at the ballot box. The term fake news is only their first attempt to try and discredit and antagonize any information contradictory to the mainstream corporate propaganda. A more concerning tactic is government influence over corporate entities with the power of censorship. More and more we see companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and others censoring political views on the basis of fake news or hate speech. Although these are private companies which reserve the right to censor whatever the fuck they want, people have become so dependent on their services that reality is being fashioned out of their censorship, and governments are exploiting the opportunity to influence these very companies and therefore the distribution of information to the public. That is why we must vehemently oppose any regulation seeking to undermine the sovereignty of the internet, whether it's coming from the left, the right, Trump himself, it doesn't matter. In fact, the new head of the FCC under Donald Trump, Ajit Pai, has been a strong critic of net neutrality in the past, and we must strongly oppose this ideology. Net neutrality may seem like a small rock, but even the smallest of pebbles can start an avalanche. I'll be honest, I don't think Donald Trump has a solid understanding of the internet, or as he would call it, the cyber. That is not to say though that I think he's closed-minded to suggestions. I believe that if he knew the implications of net neutrality, he would stand to support it, and why not? It was the internet that ultimately got him elected, and it is to his benefit to keep it completely free of corporate and political influence. Now, the coining of the term fake news is nothing more than a desperate attempt to discredit the free flow of information. It is nothing more than the establishment's sick attempt to try and tell you, don't think for yourself, let us do that for you. It is no different than the system of feudalism prior to the Gutenberg press that I brought up earlier. A perfect example of this is when WikiLeaks began to have a significant impact on Clinton's campaign through the Podesta emails, and CNN came out saying, quote, "It's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media, so everything you learn about this, you're learning from us." Yeah, nice. Sit down and go back to your rat-infested hovel, you peasant. Put that Bible down, because only the clergy is allowed to read and interpret it. It says that you must pay me a tithe and blindly obey the state, or risk eternal damnation in the fires of hell. But you can always buy an indulgence from me to save your soul. Can people not see the parallels here? What the fuck does CNN mean it's different for the media? I am the media. I don't need a multi-million-dollar studio, a pound of makeup on my face, and a teleprompter to be considered a member of the press. I can form my own opinions, and I will report with greater objectivity than any media talking head could ever hope to, because they are slaves. They are slaves to their executives and political masters. The great irony of this is that by calling every non-mainstream opinion fake news, the corporate media is driving more and more people to conduct their own research and look for alternative viewpoints. They are propagating their own death, and the harder they resist, the harder they will fall. It is futile to swim against the current lest you drown. The sensible thing is to turn around and swim the other way. If you still romanticize the idea that journalism is held to high standards and is the foundation of truth within Western society, I urge you to research who controls the media conglomerate. A vast majority of mainstream news organizations, both in television and in print, is owned by a tiny number of super companies. Groups such as Time Warner, Viacom, Disney, and a few others. They collectively control news agencies like the Wall Street Journal, Fox, CNN, HBO, NBC, and so on. Profit is the motive here, and parasitism is the means. By sensationalizing and clickbaiting Donald Trump and feeding off of him like parasites, these companies hope to squeeze every last drop of profit that they can. The social harm, annihilation of truth, and to be frank, global danger that occurs as a result is inconsequential to them. By creating an antagonistic relationship amongst each other and among the American people and with the Trump administration, they can generate incredible revenue. Who do you think benefits when the right-wing propaganda of Fox News feuds with the left-wing propaganda of CNN. They both do. The conflict generates views and clicks for both. Who do you think benefits when BuzzFeed and CNN knowingly publish an overtly fake story about Donald Trump hiring Russian prostitutes to piss on each other? By the way, they 100% knew it was fake prior to publishing the story because they plastered the words unverified claims 100 times in the article to protect themselves from libel accusations. BuzzFeed and CNN benefit from it because who gives a fuck if it's completely fake? You still clicked on the story, you still shared it with your friends, you generated the ad revenue for them. Who benefits when reporters are instructed to take things out of context in order to create enticing headlines? What incentive is there for factual reporting in today's age? If profit is the motive, there is no incentive. Even more troubling is the government involvement in the mainstream media, the propaganda arm of globalism and corporatism. Think back to the early 1950s and Operation Mockingbird, which was a large-scale operation of the CIA to infiltrate the news, both foreign and domestic, in order to influence public thought through sheer propaganda. This operation was investigated in the 1970s by Congress, and the revelations were remarkable. Listen to some of the excerpts from the congressional hearings.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
The culmination of the findings from the investigation was published in the Church Committee's report in 1976, which amongst other things found that, quote, approximately 50 of the agency assets are individual American journalists or employees of the U.S. media organizations. And what about the Iraq War? Do you think that the corporate media was not complicit in spreading the Bush administration's propaganda that sold that fucking disaster to the American people? I would urge you to read about the Pentagon Military Analyst Program, in which the Department of Defense was covertly coaching retired members of the military to get on television and sell the disgraceful war to the complicit population. Or take it from George W. Bush himself. Listen to this.
Mr. President, earlier this year you told us you had ordered your administration to cease and desist on payments to journalists to promote your agenda. You cited the need for ethical concerns and the need for a bright line between the press and the government. Your administration continues to make the use of video news releases, which are prepackaged news stories sent to television stations, fully aware that some or many of these stations will air them without any disclaimer that they are produced by the government. Comptroller General of the United States this week said that raises ethical questions. Does it raise ethical questions about the use of government money to produce stories about the government that wind up being aired with no disclosure that they were produced by the government?
There is a Justice Department opinion that says these pieces are within the law so long as they're based upon facts, not advocacy.
Hell, just me bringing up the Iraq War is probably giving you flashbacks to weapons of mass destruction. How many fucking times would you hear that phrase on CNN, Fox News, ABC in the span of 5 minutes prior to the invasion of Baghdad? No, the only fake news is the one on your television. Turn that shit off. Boycott these degenerates. Do not become complicit in their war crimes and enrichment of the elite. They are puppets of a globalist and corporatist agenda. Before Ted Cruz was defeated in the Republican primaries, one of his favorite arguments to explain his poor polling was to declare that Donald Trump had received over $2 billion of free advertisement through the media coverage. And this is true. Trump, by far, received more media coverage than any other candidate, Republican or Democrat. However, here's the fine print. How much of that exposure was positive? How much of that exposure was objective? How much of that exposure was antagonistic? No, Rafael Eduardo Cruz. Donald Trump did not receive $2 billion of free advertisement. He had a $2 billion media hit piece on him. And before the widespread use of the internet, it would have worked. Nobody in their right mind would have voted for Donald Trump if their only source of information came from the television and newspaper. The internet is the biggest sword we have against the snake of globalism, and the fact that Donald Trump won the presidency indicates that the people more and more have become reliant on it. The elite are desperate, and they have completely lost control over the process of information transfer. We must be on our guards because they will not relinquish it so easily. Call me farcical, but amidst escalating global tensions, I believe that an attack on the internet amalgamates to one of the greatest threats facing our society. society. Do not concede a single inch of internet freedom. It must not happen. You want to talk about fake news? Let's talk about how every step of the way, virtually every major news outlet conspired with the Clinton campaign to have her elected and Donald Trump destroyed. Let's talk about how off the record she wined and dined campaign reporters from ABC, Bloomberg, BuzzFeed, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, the New York Times, Politico, Yahoo, People Magazine, PBS, Vice, CBS, the list goes on. Let's talk about how the New York Times allowed the Clinton campaign to review their content and filter out unfavorable coverage. Let's talk about how the CEO of Google's parent company Alphabet was working for the Clinton campaign. Google, you may or may not remember, was notoriously filtering its autocomplete searches to highlight favorability towards Clinton while smearing Donald Trump. Speaking of CEOs, let's talk about the CEO of Disney. And you have to remember here, Disney is the parent company of several media organizations like ABC. Let's talk about how the CEO of Disney donated hundreds of thousands to the Clinton campaign and colluded with her organization. Or how about George Stephanopoulos, who works for ABC, donating over $75,000 to the Clinton Foundation. Let's talk about how MSNBC's Chris Hayes staged an entire interview with Hillary Clinton reading word for word from a script that was pre-sent to her campaign to do a hit piece on Bernie Sanders' taxes back in the primary. Let's talk about how NBC colluded with Hillary's campaign to give good press coverage to the Clinton Foundation. Let's talk about how Facebook thief Mark Zuckerberg, I call him thief because he basically stole his friend's social media project and launched it as the Facebook, snubbing out collaborators and taking all the credit. Anyways, let's talk about how Zuckerberg was in direct contact with the Clinton campaign, asking for advice on how to engage in political operations to advance his own personal policy goals. Let's remember how throughout the campaign, Facebook was manipulating trending stories to infect users with a pro-Hillary, anti-Trump sentiment. Let's talk about how Correct the Record identified hundreds of media pundits to give talking points to. Let's talk about how John Oliver was caught red-handed colluding with the Clinton campaign. Yes, the same John Oliver that people in their 20s love to plaster all over their Facebook page because he makes politics fun and exciting through humor. Yay! By the way, his show is on HBO, which is owned by Time Warner, a company that shamelessly donated to the Clintons' campaign. Do you not see the trend here? Let's talk about how Glenn Thrush from Political sent a whole section of an article to John Podesta asking for his approval prior to publishing it. The funny thing about this one, Thrush admits to being the giant fucking scumbag that he is for doing it. Let's talk about how the Huffington Post emailed the Clinton camp to declare their undying support and asking for any opportunities to help elect her as president. Let's talk about how Donna Brazile fed debate questions to Hillary Clinton, something that she has admitted to now, by the way, but only after blaming the Russians didn't work. Perhaps most dangerous, though, is the media's manipulation of reality. Most people are too busy to observe what is happening around them. They have a full-time job, family, friends, hobbies, whatever it is, they're just too busy to pay attention, so their reality of the world comes from what is reported on by the media. And what is reported? It is reported that all Trump supporters are violent, racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic thugs. Do you remember the anti-Trump protests in Chicago that led to countless injuries and the event being canceled? Yeah, the event that got around-the-clock coverage for the next several days. Well, it turns out that the DNC operatives were partly responsible for inciting the violence. But who did the media blame? You guessed it, Donald Trump and his supporters.
Before this rally started, when we saw what was happening in the streets outside this event, and we saw what Donald Trump had done to incite violence, and I'm saying that deliberately, to incite violence from his event earlier today in St. Louis.
Trump's own rhetoric at his rallies, and in particular, some of the violence we have seen at his rallies, some of the violent clashes with protesters who often are African American, has fed into what we're seeing here tonight.
Or do you remember when some bigot Trump supporter vandalized Africatown Center in Seattle by drawing swastikas, racial slurs, and vote Trump? Well, it turns out an East African volunteer at the center was actually the one to vandalize it. Here's the problem though. The media will blow up the original reports of racial crimes and violence and then go back and add some fine print to the bottom of their articles when the truth comes out and after the original event has vanished from the public's mind. I would have to rant for another hour to cover all examples of this. Remember, for example, the Mississippi church with a black congregation that burned down 1 week before the election and had "Vote Trump" graffiti on it. Sure enough, it was milked for everything it was worth by the anti-Trump media. And sure enough, it was not some racist Trumpster responsible. It was a member of the congregation that torched it. This is hilarious, by the way, because the guy's last name was actually Mick Clinton. Remember the gay comedian that was beaten to a pulp by homophobic Trump supporters shortly after the election? Yeah, he made the whole thing up. Or how about when two white male Islamophobes homophobic Trump supporters harassed an innocent Muslim girl and stole her hijab. Nope, she made the whole thing up. Remember the other Muslim woman? The one who actually slashed her own cheek with a glass shard so that she could claim it was Donald Trump's fault? This actually reminds me of a personal story. When I was in college and Obama won the election, my university made national headlines because apparently every white person on campus went around burning effigies of Obama and hanging nooses from trees. Sorry, but no, some idiot seeking attention took a picture of a rope swing which had been on campus for years and another picture of some kids having a barbecue and sent it to the local news, and before you knew it, the media vans were swarming. It would have been hilarious if not for the fact that the truth never came out and nobody apologized for the slander. You want real political violence? Let's talk about the kidnapping and torture of a mentally ill white guy by youths screaming anti-Trump, anti-white rhetoric. Let's talk about some thug beating an old female Trump supporter into hamburger meat with a chair. Let's talk about kids being attacked by mobs for wearing a Make America Great Again hat, or teenage girls being attacked by their classmates for making pro-Trump comments on Instagram. Let's talk about people being pulled out of their cars and brutalized because they voted for Donald Trump. Let's talk about peaceful Trump supporters being attacked at random while walking in the streets. Let's talk about being mercilessly kicked for standing around while being white in the middle of an anti-Trump gathering. Let's talk about a mob of people harassing a homeless black woman and destroying her property because she chose to express her support for Donald Trump. You certainly don't hear about that on the television, and here's the problem. All these people committing this violence believe themselves to be heroes. Why? Because the media has done nothing but propagate the myth that Donald Trump is Hitler and his supporters are Nazis. The media has done nothing but incite hatred through false reporting by suggesting that anybody who voted for Trump is racist, sexist, and every other ist under the sun. The people engaging in this violence think that they are stopping the next Holocaust because of the media lies. They feel completely justified in their actions and are cheered on by their peers. The media, the propaganda arm of the elites, has blood on its hands. They are responsible for the violence and disunity in the country. You want to talk to me about fake news? If after this rant you still think that you are not being manipulated and drowning in a sea of propaganda, I highly recommend you reassess your life and commitment to being informed. The mainstream media is dead. You cannot and you should not believe a single thing that they report on anymore. They have no credibility. 100% of your news should be coming from alternative, independent sources, and you should be verifying all of it. Do not trust opinion reporting unless you analyze the claims.